Imagine you're in a room full of people, and you know the answer. You know exactly what's right. But something stops you. Something deep inside tells you to stay quiet. And so you do. You say nothing. And later, when everything falls apart, people ask, why didn't anyone speak up? Why did the smart ones stay silent? Today, on Motivara, we're going to answer that question with a story that might just change the way you see yourself forever. And trust me, if you've ever held back the truth to keep the peace, this one is going to hit differently. Before we get into it, if you're someone who believes in growing your mind and your character, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a like. Because this channel exists for people exactly like you. Meet Daniel. He was the kind of man who noticed everything. In any room he walked into, he could read the energy, understand the people, and see through the noise to what was really happening. He wasn't loud. He wasn't the guy cracking jokes or demanding attention. He was the guy sitting slightly to the side, watching, listening, processing. His colleagues at work often described him as deep or wise, or sometimes just quiet. And most of them liked him. A few of them were unsettled by him, because wise people have a way of making others feel seen, even when they don't mean to. Daniel worked at a mid-sized company that had been struggling quietly for about 2 years. Nobody said it out loud, but the numbers were declining, the best employees were leaving, and the leadership was making decisions that seemed increasingly disconnected from reality. The CEO, a man named Richard, had surrounded himself with people who agreed with him, not because they were dishonest by nature, but because Richard had a way of rewarding agreement and punishing doubt. Nothing direct, nothing you could prove in a meeting room, but everyone felt it. That quiet chill in the air when someone pushed back on an idea. That subtle shift in Richard's tone. That feeling that if you said the wrong thing, your name would somehow end up off the next important project. Daniel saw all of this. He saw it clearly, and more than that, he had real solutions. He had sat with the data for months, understood the patterns, and developed a proposal that he genuinely believed could turn things around. It wasn't complicated. It was clear, practical, and built on evidence. And yet, week after week, meeting after meeting, Daniel said nothing. He would open his mouth, feel the weight of the room, look at Richard's face, and choose silence. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment. He told himself nobody would listen anyway. He told himself that maybe he was wrong. Maybe the leadership knew things he didn't. Maybe it wasn't his place. This is the part of the story that most people recognize. Because most of us have been Daniel. Most of us have swallowed a truth that needed to be spoken. We sat in rooms where we knew better, and we smiled, nodded, and said nothing. And we called it wisdom. We called it humility. We called it reading the room. But here's the hard question that Motivara wants you to sit with today. What if silence in those moments isn't wisdom at all? What if it's fear dressed up in smart clothes? There was a young woman in Daniel's company. Her name was Priya. She had been there for only 8 months. She didn't have Daniel's experience or his depth of understanding, but she had something he had slowly lost. She still believed that the truth was worth the risk. In a quarterly review meeting, when Richard presented a plan that everyone in the room privately knew was flawed, Priya spoke. Her voice was a little shaky. Her words weren't perfectly structured, but she laid out her concern clearly, respectfully, and honestly. The room went silent. Richard's jaw tightened. A few people looked down at their notebooks, and Daniel watched from across the table, feeling something strange move through his chest. Something that felt uncomfortably like shame. Richard dismissed Priya's concern with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He said they would keep it in mind. The meeting moved on, but something had shifted. Because Priya had said the thing out loud. She had named the problem in front of everyone. And even though Richard had dismissed it, the people in that room could no longer pretend they hadn't heard it. The truth, once spoken, doesn't disappear. It just lives in the silence differently. Over the next 2 weeks, 3 people quietly approached Priya. They told her she had said what they'd all been thinking. One of them was a senior manager who had been with the company for 6 years. Another was someone from the finance team who had been sitting on a spreadsheet that told an even darker story than Priya had shared in the meeting. And slowly, a quiet coalition of honest people began to form. Not out of rebellion, not out of politics, but out of one young woman's decision to stop pretending. Daniel watched all of this from the outside. And the thing that was eating him alive wasn't embarrassment or jealousy. It was recognition. He recognized that he had made a choice every single week to protect himself by staying silent. And that choice had cost more than his own integrity. His silence had been permission. His silence had told everyone around him that the situation was acceptable. That the culture of fear was just the way things were. Every smart person who says nothing in a broken system is sending a message, and that message is that the system is fine. This is what most people miss about silence. They think it's neutral. They think if they don't say anything wrong, they haven't done anything wrong. But silence in the face of something that needs to be addressed is a decision. It is an active choice with real consequences. And smart people, people who see clearly, people who understand what's happening, carry a weight of responsibility that others don't. Because you can't claim ignorance, you knew, and you stayed quiet anyway. That's not safety. That's a slow erosion of the person you're trying to be. Daniel went home that night and couldn't sleep. He lay in the dark thinking about all the moments he had chosen comfort over courage. He thought about a friend years ago who had been heading into a destructive relationship, and Daniel had seen it clearly, but said nothing because he didn't want to make things awkward. He thought about a project in his previous job where he had known the approach was wrong. But the senior partner seemed so confident that Daniel had convinced himself. He was probably missing something. He thought about his own father, who had been sick and was refusing to see a doctor. And Daniel had nodded along because confronting him felt too hard. A whole life of small silences, each one feeling safe in the moment, each one leaving a mark that hadn't fully healed. There's a moral in this story, TH. It goes deeper than just speak up at work. It's about what happens to a person's soul when they repeatedly choose silence over honesty. Something gets quieter inside you. Your own voice starts to feel less real. And eventually, the wisdom you carry, all that insight and perception and understanding, begins to feel like a burden instead of a gift. Because what good is seeing clearly if you refuse to act on what you see? Daniel submitted his proposal the following Monday. He sent it directly to Richard and copied in the senior leadership team. He kept it respectful, evidence-based, and clear. He didn't know how it would be received. He didn't know if it would cost him his position. But he knew something else with complete certainty. He was done being the smartest person in the room who said the least. The response surprised him. Richard didn't dismiss it. In fact, 2 days later, he called Daniel into his office, not to reprimand him, but to ask questions, real questions. Because even someone who has grown accustomed to agreement can recognize a genuine idea when it lands in front of them without ego attached to it. The proposal didn't fix everything overnight. Real change rarely does, but it started something. A conversation that had been waiting in the margins for years finally moved to the center, and the company, slowly, began to find its way back to something healthier. Not because Daniel was a hero, but because he finally decided that his voice had value, and that keeping it locked away wasn't protecting anyone. It was just protecting his fear. This is the story of every smart person who has ever stayed silent. And here on Motivara, we believe that the most powerful thing you can do isn't to speak without thinking. It's to stop pretending that thinking without speaking is enough. Wisdom that never gets expressed is just silence with a good reason attached. And good reasons for silence are never in short supply. There will always be a reason to wait. Always a reason the moment isn't right. Always a reason someone else should go first. But here's what the story of Daniel and Priya teaches us. The person who finally speaks doesn't have to be the most qualified, the most experienced, or the most certain. They just have to be willing. And that willingness, that single act of courage, can shift the entire energy of a room, a relationship, a life. So ask yourself tonight, honestly, is there something you know that you haven't said? Is there someone in your life who needs to hear something true from you? Is there an idea sitting in you that deserves to be spoken out loud? Because every day you wait, the silence gets louder, and the longer you carry a truth unexpressed, the heavier it gets. Not for the world, for you. If this story stayed with you, if you recognized yourself anywhere in Daniel's journey, drop a comment below and tell us, what is one truth you've been holding back? You don't have to share the details. Just let us know it exists. Because sometimes naming it here is the first step to saying it where it matters. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, someone who has been silent too long, share this video with them right now. Not as a lesson, as a gift. Because that's what Motivara is here to do. To reach the people who are ready to grow, one story at a time.